Nippon.com.
I'd like to welcome everybody here at our salon in our Tokyo offices at Toronto to our 10th anniversary event and to this panel discussion that we're going to have on the topic of communicating Japan to the world. I also welcome everybody who is joining us online. At the end of the panel discussion, we are going to have time for questions and answers, I hope. So I suggest I'd like you to put any questions that you might have in the comment section on our YouTube channel, and hopefully we can get to those. My name is James Singleton. I am an editor here at Nippon.com. I will be the moderator of today's event. And instead of me introducing our distinguished panel, I will let them introduce themselves, starting with Peter Landers to my left.
Thank you, James. I'm Peter Landers. I've been the bureau chief at the Wall Street Journal for about 10 years now, but I was also here as a younger reporter in the 1990s, working for the Associated Press even before the internet age. So it's great to have a collection, I think, today of people who have been working on various forms of connecting Japan to the world, whether it be through a website or social media or YouTube or whatever it may be. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
ありがとうございます。PHP 総研の大岩と申します。基本的に議論は英語でということなんですけども、私だけ日本語担当でよろしくお願いします。先ほども自己紹介させていただいたんですが、日本の対外発信を専門にやっておりまして、もともとは書籍の編集者を長らくしていたんですけれども、世界的な指揮者の方々にインタビューをして、それを日本人の読者とか、あるいは韓国、中国、台湾、タイといったアジアの読者に向けて本の形で出版するということを手掛けてまいりました。現在は制作シンクタンク PHP 総研で勤務をしておりまして、政府の広報アドバイザーなど政策関係の対外発信の仕事もしております。本日はどうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
Hi everyone, my name is Ananya Donapati. I've been in Japan for a little bit over 6 months now. My background is that I've been self-studying Japanese for about 7 to 10 years now, and my main kind of career focuses in marketing. And I'm currently working at Woodstock.club. It's an SNS-based stock investing app for young Japanese people. So my job is essentially to kind of push that marketing across the Japan market. And then I also do content creation across various social media platforms and have about 300K followers across those different platforms. And so I'm very used to kind of sharing kind of what I learned about Japan to foreign audiences, but I also do that for Japanese audiences and kind of vice versa through both of those jobs. And previously, I've done marketing at Amazon and different things like that, but that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is Ryūichirō Takeshita, but people call me Ryan. I work for a startup called PIVOT. It's a media startup launched in Tokyo 2 years ago, and we produce videos focused on entrepreneurs, startups, and technology. So we have 1.2 million subscribers on YouTube already. So people, especially young people, instead of reading the Nikkei, they come to us. They read the Wall Street Journal. But there's a global shift from text articles to video. So today I want to argue that in order to communicate with the outside world, he said, we have to focus on videos. And as my career looks that well, because I started my career as an Asahi Shimbun reporter, and then went to HuffPost Japan editor-in-chief, then pivot. So my career is from text to video. So today I want to talk about videos.
Hello, I'm Peter Durfee. I'm here with Nippon.com. I've been in Japan since the 1980s. I've been working as a translator and editor since the 1990s. I joined a company called Japan Echo. We did a magazine of that name, along with Quadernos de Japón, Kaeru Japón, some different languages. So we had multilingual print experience way back in the day. Since 2011, we've been online as Nippon.com. I head the English language team here. And we do 7 languages, and I can't speak for the details of what all of our language teams go through, but I think we face a lot of the same issues, challenges in our work. I'll be speaking from the perspective of our English language side, and looking forward to getting some great advice on how we can do a better job from our panelists. Thank you.
All right, well, to kick things off, we'll start with the simple topic of what are issues in communicating Japan to the world? Understanding that Japan is not a single entity, but made up of groups, and government, and individuals. So that will be, it's a very broad topic, but if we can spend a few moments talking about what are the issues of communicating Japan to the world. And I think I'd like to start with Ryan, if you could.
Sure, yeah, it's a good question. So I have several things to say, but I think the one real problem here is that the Japanese people are not participating in the conversation of the digital age. So I'm sure, let me ask you, so how many people here like watch YouTube or listen to English podcasts? Quite a few. So those of you online, maybe like half or 60% are raising their hands. And I also listen to English podcasts regularly, but I noticed that there's no Japanese person on that show. You know, no Japanese business person, no Japanese entrepreneur, maybe sometimes Japanese politicians, but no one's participating in the global conversation. So whenever we talk about this topic, we always say taigai hasshin, or how can we spread our message to the world? But I really hate that word. What's taigai hasshin? I think the digital trend is not about messaging, but how to participate in the conversation. To be blunt, I saw the first half of this seminar, and there were 3 persons speaking about the purpose of Nippon.com. It was really boring because it was just 3 persons just in front of the camera and speaking their message out. And no one will listen to your messages. People want to participate in conversation, so it should be more conversational. And I think Japan as a country is totally missing that part. And I'm really worried that we are entering the lost decades of digital communication.
Thank you very much for your criticism.
You can challenge me if you want, or maybe from the floor who just gave their message. Yes.
I would challenge you, but those 3 people are in the audience. So I should stand up for them. Instead, I'll let Ananya, can you go ahead and...
Yeah, I
say
feel like
something nice.
I think
I'm the bad guy, so.
I have a lot to say because I think I agreed actually with a lot of the statements that you
agree?
mentioned.
Okay.
I think that it's extremely important to have a vision as to what you're trying to achieve, and I really like that about Nippon.com. And I thought one thing was that you guys were very vulnerable and you weren't afraid to vocalize that vulnerability, and I think that's one of the big steps that a lot of media, even like media in the United States, tends to miss. But the main issue is in Japan, I think a lot of communication is like ippotsuko, so it only goes one direction. And a lot of the culture is very unique as well, so it's difficult to kind of bridge that gap. But the important thing is getting involved with those global discussions and being a part of it, so that way it's not like other countries kind of speaking on behalf of Japan and using that as sort of the basis. Because, you know, you have people like me who talk about Japan, but there aren't enough people speaking up about it. And I think that that's a huge important piece of it. And really boiling down to what the current people want to see. Currently, I think a lot of people, at least from my perspective, want to see the individualist view. So any news, it kind of comes from that singular person, how they're viewing it. And I think that view is what makes people feel more relatable or kind of understand what the situation is.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
In a nicer way.
In a nicer way.
Speak your mind. You don't have to be nice. Nobody says you have to be nice. So, Ōiwa-san, would you like to weigh in on this?
はい、ありがとうございます。ちょっともう竹下さんの最初のパンチにちょっとびっくりして。
日本語に話したらもっと丁寧に言いますけど、ちょっと英語だとキャラが変わってしまってすみません。
そうですね。あれ竹下さんってこんなキャラだったから。
So when I speak in Japanese, I'm a very nice person. So she knows me when I'm speaking Japanese. So すみません。
ありがとうございます。新たな一面が見れてよかったです。 ただ私もお二人と意見は本当に一致していまして、昨年日本のナラティブパワーという研究会の提言報告書を出したんですけれども、そこで強調しているのはやはり日本の対外発信の一番の問題っていうのはナレーター、つまり語り手がいないんじゃないかっていうことを指摘したんですね。でナラティブっていうのはちょっとそのソフトパワーっていう大きなところの中の言説というか、言説の影響力みたいな意味なんですけれども、私は例えばポール・クルーグマンだったり、マルクス・ガブリエルさんとか、そういう海外の言論人の取材をいろいろしてきたんですが、やっぱりそういう方々に日本のオピニオンがなかなか伝わっていないなっていうことを強く感じて、そのナラティブパワーという報告書を書かせていただきました。でその時にナラティブを伝えていくにはやっぱりナレーターが必要で、そのナレーターが日本にはなかなか、いろんな分野でいらっしゃるんですけれども、世界的に知られている言論人っていうのがなかなか存在していない、あるいは本当に数が少ない、層が薄いっていうことが問題なんじゃないかなっていうふうに思っています。でじゃあそれをどうしていったらいいのかっていうところなんですけれども、お二人がおっしゃったようにやっぱり会話っていうのはそういう語り手がいないと成立しない。じゃあ語り手を育成するっていうところがやっぱり重要で、そのためには民間のプラットフォームだったりとかメディアっていうのはその言論を作っていく上ですごく重要な役割をしていくものだと思うので、そういう意味では日本.comさんのこれからにすごく期待したいなというふうに思っております。今でも十分大きな役割を果たされていると思いますけれども、そういうナレーターの不在、語り手の不在、グローバルな言論人を作っていくっていうことが日本の大きな課題ではないかなというふうに私は思っています。
はい、ありがとうございました。Not participating in the global conversation, no narrator. Peter, what is your take on it?
Some of the criticism maybe would apply even to those of us at the Wall Street Journal, and I think all media, whether it be Nippon.com or PIVOT or a publisher like the PHP, the think tank, we all face the challenge of communicating in this world, and we at the Wall Street Journal have a new, not so new, as of a year ago, a new editor, our first female editor in the 135-year history of the Wall Street Journal, and she's come in with some new perspectives about how we can increase our audience size and increase our reach to the world. And part of it is, as some panelists, as Ananya and Takeshita-san discussed, a more sort of personal approach. And I heard I didn't hear this directly from her, but when we report on major news events in Washington, she asked, who's going to put kind of an opinionated, because our news department is not part of the Wall Street Journal's news department. We don't produce opinion articles, but who's going to produce a sort of personalized take on the news, someone with a kind of their own character, not just sort of dry, plain reporting, but someone who can analyze with a certain amount of personality and individuality, was what she wanted more of, I heard, and she also wants more profiles of people in the news. And I think sometimes, especially in business news, we write about the stock market going up and down, or inflation is 2% or 3%, and we it's easy to forget the people behind the news. So I think we all face these challenges of communication. Well, maybe I'll stop there. We'll have further discussion.
All right, thank you. From Peter to Peter Durfee.
I think what we see as a lot of the value of what we do, and it's something that was true when we were doing magazines as well, is these projects came about in an era when you could access information about Japan that was written by foreign observers. If you wanted to read about Japan in English, there would be American reporters writing about it, British reporters writing about it. But there wasn't really much of a channel for Japanese people to tell their own stories about their own country. And by getting articles written by Japanese observers of Japan, putting those out in the languages that we work with, this is a way to, ideally, to foster this communication, this conversation. Ōiwa-san's PHP Institute report on narrative power, the concept of narrative power, your ability to craft a narrative to get this message out, this is something that maybe is where we need to focus much more on now than we ever did when we were doing magazines. We're not publishing 6 times a year anymore. We publish new articles every day in every language. We need to be much more nimble. We need to be producing this content, getting the content out from Japanese voices into our other languages, but also thinking about who is receiving this narrative, who's receiving this message, the other side of the conversation. As a translator, one thing that I always try to teach my other translators is we're not just taking the words on the page and translating these words into words in a different language. We're taking this message, this text, and reproducing the text in a new language. And this means changing the words entirely a lot of the time. The message stays the same, but the words aren't vocabulary listed down the page. This is something that we need to consider who's going to be reading these articles. For our website, it's quite a diverse set of content on there. We do have some in-depth treatments of politics, economics, some deeper social issues. These, when we write these in English, for instance, I'm trying to think of who is the policymaker who's going to be reading this article, who is the government official, who is the business strategy designer who's reading this article to get some insight about Japan. Write for that person. If I'm writing a travel article, Totori is great, you gotta go see the sand dunes. I want to be exciting. I want people to want to go to Totori. I want to reach out to the type of person who's interested in traveling to Japan. Thinking about the recipient of the message is always a very important part of this conversation, communication, and developing a stronger narrative power. So that's something that we are trying to focus on. The back and forth, if you say conversation, it makes me think of, we get an article out, should we have comments on the article so people can shout at us? Is that conversation? Is that something that we need to work on, or is it more just being active, getting stuff out every day? When we talk about having a conversation, how do people talk back to us?
I think it's not just about the technology, but maybe the attitude of, so it's not having a message and just spreading a message to the outside world, but first of all, look at what the other people are talking about. For instance, at this moment, people are talking about maybe Elon Musk, or how should he operate X. And when I look at the global conversations, people are talking about hate speech, fake news, but maybe Japan can add another viewpoint, because we're a country full of earthquakes. And when there's an earthquake, X or Twitter are used as a lifeline to rescue people or have information about needs and wants. So that can be a conversation. It's not just about commenting, but joining the conversation. So first of all, knowing what's being talked about right now and adding value to the conversation. I think, to me, that's being conversational. What do you other guys think? Maybe Ananya? Okay.
No, I mean, I totally agree. I think adding to the conversation is a huge part of it. And in general, just, putting out information into the world, and yes, thinking about who's getting that information. And also, I think honestly, like foreigners and, people from where I'm from in America, like we're very open to the Japanese mindset and like thought processes. And I think a lot of people want to know what that perspective is. And you'll see that a lot in terms of media, such as films and things like that. But I think that in terms of journalism and news, there could be a lot more. And personally, I read a lot of like articles and stuff through social media and Instagram and things like that. And I've seen a lot more things popping up there. And I think it allows for another platform for people to communicate when they read these articles as well. So it doesn't have to necessarily be direct. It can still be in a part of the overall message, but it doesn't have to be directly underneath.
I want to add to that because I attended an American university for a year, and I was surprised that the professor was saying that if you raise your hand or ask a question, it means you're contributing to the conversation. And that's a phrase that not many Japanese professors use. So, raising your hand is contributing, and I like that phrase. So I think being conversation is how you can add value to the global conversation. Yeah.
Ōiwa-san, she had her hand raised, so she wants to contribute.
ありがとうございます。すいません。ありがとうございます。そうですね。先ほどのその会話っていうことで言うと、じゃあその会話をどういうふうにしていったらいいかっていうことでちょっと私の意見を言わせていただきたいんですが、そのナラティブパワーの報告書でキーフレーズとして書いたのがユニークソリューション for global issues っていうことを書いたんですね。要は今地球規模で起きている課題がたくさんあります。例えば気候変動であったり民主主義の危機であったり、あるいはもう昨年一昨年と、戦争の数年間だと言っていいと思いますけれども、その地政学的な変化もたくさんあったと思います。あるいはジェンダーの問題だったり、さまざまな地球規模の課題が山積しているという時代において、そういうグローバルなイシューにおいて日本がこういうユニークなソリューションを提供できる、そういうふうな会話をしていくと、日本の世界への貢献ということにもつながるのかなというふうに思いました。で例えばですね、日本.comさんへの提案としてはですね、例えばですね、そういう気候変動の海外の指揮者の方とそれを専門にしている日本の指揮者の方との対談とか、もう本当に会話をそのメディアで見せてしまうとか、それに対する日本が世界に貢献できるソリューション、あるいは例えばインドネシアの専門家の方が世界に貢献できるソリューション、それについて話し合ってまた新たな価値をその会話の中で発見していくとか、そういう形にするとより双方的公的になるのかなというふうに思ったりもしました。
Thank you. I think Ōiwa-san touched on that. That brings us to, I think, my next question here is maybe just taking one step back, something more basic. What is the value then in communicating Japan to the world, as opposed to doing something else in Japan? As a foreigner talking about communicating Japan to the world, it's an issue that I think about. There's a lot of things that have value. I wonder what everybody's view is on that. Peter Landers, what do you think?
I think it is, and I'm repeating what Ōiwa-san has said in a different way, perhaps, but there are so many similarities between Japan and just take the United States. We have McDonald's, and you can get deliveries from Amazon, and now you can even ride on an Uber in Japan. Many visitors are coming to Japan from the U.S. and they assume that Uber exists, and actually it does exist in Japan now as a ride-hailing service, not just the Uber Eats. So many similarities, and yet, as we all know, so many differences in history going back years, and culture, religion, and so on. And so it really is kind of a great place to see whether your theories about how the world works, if you're American, right? Wall Street Journal readers are mostly American, not entirely, but mostly. It's a great, as I say, way to test your theory of the world. And sometimes things happen in Japan first. For example, in our area of business, the Bank of Japan was the first to introduce zero interest rates, and I can report from today's Bank of Japan Policy Board meeting that interest rates are still supposed to be around zero in Japan. And then everyone thought, well, that's a special case, but it turned out that ultimately after the global financial crisis, the U.S. also, the Federal Reserve also adopted something very similar, a zero interest rate policy. So many lessons from Japan about how that works and maybe what doesn't work with that kind of policy. So that's what we try to do in some of our articles, at least in the Wall Street Journal, and I think that is the value in general, whatever our business is, the value of disseminating information about Japan to the world.
Ananya, what is your take? If you haven't seen her Instagram and other social media channels, they're very interesting. I suggest to give it a
Thank you. I think my perspective is that currently, especially on the internet, I think Japan is a huge, huge topic of discussion, at least I assume for the next 2 years, in terms of a cultural perspective. But I think culture and, you know, all the fun things, tourism that Japan has to offer is almost like a window into a lot of other areas. And so when you have that many eyes focused in that direction, you can really pull it towards all sorts of different perspectives of journalism towards Japan. And how I do that and how I like to share knowledge about Japan is a lot of iteration, a lot of test-based things where I put out content and see how much people respond to it. For example, last week I put out a video on how to exchange a Japanese business card. I did not expect this to do well at all, and it got 1.4 million views. And I was surprised to see that a lot of people cared and they wanted to know, and maybe they assumed they would do that one day. And it was a sign to me that a lot of people are also considering working in Japan, and to provide that kind of knowledge and perspective is, I don't see a lot of it on the internet currently. And if people are looking for that information, providing a supply to that is really a matter of listening to your customer, listening to the viewers, and tailoring that content towards that. And I see a huge boom in that. And looking at those numbers and using that data and seeing what's already doing really well is a huge hint as to how you can do more in that direction.
Thank you. Ryan is already going for the mic.
I think there are several topics, but I want to talk about two topics. One is sustainability, SDGs, or the UN SDGs, and geopolitics. So the first point, I think there are a lot of people, especially local people, who are pursuing SDGs. And when I talk to farmers or architects and local people, they're doing a lot of good work and keeping the sustainability. And also, so we can like address to the world that SDGs is not degrowth or just stopping the economy, but actually adds value to our GDP. That's one part. And maybe the second part is about geopolitics, because given the fact that the relations between China and the US, there's a lot of tensions. And it's important to confront China in a tough way at some points, but at the same time, Japan has a historical relations with China. And how to keep the balance between those relations and the existing geopolitical or the economic security issue is a big challenge for not only for Japan, but also for countries in East Asia or Southeast Asia. So maybe we can give a hint of how we can navigate this tough situation to the other parts of Asia.
Okay, thank you. Ōiwa-san, what are your thoughts?
はい、日本から発信していくべき、領域というか価値についてなんですけれども、本当にたくさんあると私自身は思っていて、まだまだ世界に知られていない日本の価値ってたくさんあるというふうに思っているんですが、そこからあえていくつか挙げるとすると、まずその竹下さんのおっしゃっていた地政学的な変化に関する建設っていうのは世界にも求められているかなというふうに思いますね。日本の中国研究ってすごく実は歴史も長いですし、漢字文化っていうところもありますし、その長い蓄積があるので、そうしたところからの中国観だったり世界に対する情勢の見方っていうこともあると思います。あとは生活哲学っていうのが結構今世界から生活の、哲学というか生活のライフスタイルですね、が結構世界から注目されているなというのはここ数年思っているところでして、例えば生きがいという本が全世界で500万部の今ベストセラーになっているんですけれども、スペイン人のジャーナリストの方と作家の方が日本の高齢者の多い村とかを取材して、日本人が生きがいを持ってどういうふうに長くハッピーに生きているかっていうのを書いた本なんですけれども、これが全世界でベストセラーになっていたりとか、あるいは皆さん本当にご存知だと思いますけども、近藤麻理恵さんのタイディングアップとかですね、そういうものを減らして豊かに暮らすとか、なんて言うんでしょう、禅的なライフスタイルとかって言われたりしますけど、その禅っていうのもちょっとね、 若干勘違いされているところはあるとは思いますが、そういったライフスタイルへの注目だったり、日本的な暮らし方の提案みたいなところも価値として発信していくところがあるかなというふうに思っています。実は 8領域を私の原報告書の中で挙げていて、詳しくはちょっとそこを見ていただきたいんですけれども、皆さんがおっしゃってないところを挙げるとすると、そういうところかなというふうに思いました。
Thank you. I've heard rumblings of this Ikigai being the next big, replacing Kondomarie is the next big boom. We'll see. Peter, how does Nippon.com look at this issue?
Well, you've been here for decades. I've been here for decades. The members of all our teams in all the different languages are all longtime residents of Japan, married to the country, married to people from the country in many cases. We are big fans of Japan. And when we put together this new purpose that was introduced earlier in the day, that was a part of our discussions, is one of the main things we're trying to achieve as an organization and through our website is to increase the number of fans of Japan around the world. And this is something that, we live here, it's a large country, there's 120 some million people. It's a big place and it has a lot of diverse stories to tell. It's not 120 million gray-suited Toyota employees. There's a lot going on in Japan, and it's entirely possible to pick and choose very interesting stories from Japan and get those out and share them. When I said earlier, talking about having a narrative power, this involves thinking about who's the reader, what they want, what they need out of this information, as well as what we have to share, what we want to give them. But in terms of crafting the type of content we want to have on our website, deciding what we want to put out there, I think we've got any number of choices. We could write a story about anything, and as long as it's written well and is engaging, it tells a story that someone out there wants to hear about Japan. There's a lot of interesting facets to the country, and there's a lot that we can share. But part of it, of course, is considering the reader, the recipient of our stories. If there is some desire from outside, we want this kind of information about Japan. If it's business-related news, the Wall Street Journal provides that kind of information admirably. Maybe we're not going to compete with the Wall Street Journal in that area. I don't think we're going to compete with the big travel sites if it's travel-focused information, but we can dig up some interesting stories that haven't been told much in other locations and get those out. But responding to demand for certain types of information is something we need to take on board and think about as we go about this.
That's a very interesting point. At Nippon.com, we publish in 7 languages, and it's always fascinating from the English side to see what stories do well in Chinese, do well in Arabic, do well in Spanish, do well in French, and lots of times they're completely different articles on different topics. And so the audience, the information that they're looking for is different across the globe. So I would like to ask, how do you see, what information are people around the world, around the globe, looking for concerning Japan? Ōiwa-san.
あれですね、どのような分野が注目されているっていう。そうですね、やっぱり、海外の指揮者の方とかと話していて、必ず出てくるのは少子高齢化っていうところはやっぱり世界から注目されているなというふうに感じます。人口減少と高齢化社会、それをどういうふうに乗り切っていくのか。で実際に、確か岡山県だったと思いますが、奈義町という出生率がすごく高い町がありまして、そこには外国のメディアとかも取材によく来ていたりということもありますし、そういう先ほどのパーパスの動画でもおっしゃっていましたけれども、少子高齢化社会をどのように解決していくか、それのためのそれこそユニークソリューションフォーグローバルイシューズだと思いますけれども、そういった面での注目というのは大きいのかなというふうに思います。あと良いことも悪いこともありのままにということなので、悪い面でもよく言われるのがやっぱりジェンダーの問題はよくありますね。やっぱりジェンダーが なぜそんなに遅れているのか、そしてそれをどう解決していったらいいのかっていうのはよく聞かれるし、注目されていることではあるかなというふうに思います。
Peter, what are your thoughts?
I would echo what we've heard already, that there is a lot of, speaking mostly again from about the American audience, that in the years that I have been covering Japan, the interest has shifted much more towards culture, food. We heard about travel. Recently, one of the reporters in my bureau suggested a story about yuzu, the citrus fruit, and I said, great. There's some place in Kyushu that grows a lot of yuzu or something. And I said, yeah, let's we can maybe write about that, but let's check what's been written already, because we always have to be careful not to repeat what either we or others have reported. And I couldn't remember any stories about yuzu, but then we did the searches, and it turned out that the New York Times and the Financial Times and also the Wall Street Journal had already done, quite extensive stories about yuzu, the fruit. And our own Wall Street Journal article was written by a freelancer for our food and drink section. I usually read the food and drink section, but I guess that week I was doing something else and I missed it. But our Wall Street Journal food and drink, this is just about 1 year ago. It says that yuzu is the citrusy ray of sunshine your winter cooking needs. So right, good for now. This delicious fruit is subtler than lemon with a floral aroma all its own. So just praising yuzu to the skies. Wow, that's what I had nothing to do with the story, as is clear, but that's what our editors in New York thought people in the U.S. wanted to read about was yuzu, a very extensive story. But I think there too, as we've heard, you do need to think of the audience, and it was not a Japan story. It was not written as, here's a fruit from Japan that you might want to try. It was really written as a universal story that, yes, the fruit happens to come from Japan, but it's more, what does it mean to you? How can you, the reader, very trying to draw that connection with the reader, how can you use yuzu during your winter time to brighten up your food enjoyment? So, anyway, I would go back again, say that 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I started at the Wall Street Journal, no one would have ever thought of writing a story about yuzu, but the times have changed.
Does anybody in the audience brighten their winter cooking with yuzu? About half, okay, good. Peter?
If I could jump in, when, for instance, we do write articles about travel destinations in Japan, it changes a lot, as James said, depending on what language we're translating into, what language we're writing for. If we're writing in English, Spanish, French, these are languages, the countries where they're spoken are very distant from Japan. And people who are going to come and travel to Japan, it may be a once or twice in a lifetime trip for them. It's a distant place. It's not an easy place to go year after year. So they tend to hit the big destinations. They want to go to Tokyo, see Asakusa. They want to go to Kamakura and see the big Buddha. They want to go to Nikko. They go to Kyoto and Nara. If we're writing this story in Chinese, Taiwanese readers maybe come to Japan 6-8 times a year. It's much cheaper, it's much closer. They've done Tokyo, they've done Kyoto and Nara. They want to go to someplace entirely new. So we have to write more, in Japanese we would talk about maniaku, tourism destinations, places that you don't generally go. Don't go skiing in Niseko, go skiing at Daisen in Tottori. There's a boat that will take you straight there, right from Korea. It's a place where you're not going to have that many crowds on the slopes. This is something that might be more interest in reading about it in the Chinese language side of the website. So we do try to think of these different audiences and things like that as well.
Ananya, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think Ryan can also relate a lot in terms of this, but I think that when you're looking at the overall global audience and communicating Japan, the real Japan is kind of what comes into place. And what I mean by that is really digging down deep into, I think foreigners especially would be interested in the behind the scenes. And that goes for whether it's corporate world or societal problems or a lot of these things that I think when you tell them from the story of an individual perspective, it really speaks. And I see a lot of that within the content that's being produced about Japan, and the ones that do really the best are getting into that behind the scenes side. And I mentioned earlier that I think also work culture is something that I find very interesting and I'd researched in college, but I think that that's another piece. And also in terms of what I see in India, for example, a decade ago, I would talk about Japanese culture and most people didn't really know much beyond the main Japanese car makers or that, you guys made really good like hardware. But now it's completely taken over to the point that I think anime and culture has really taken a big place in India, and that's a window where you have a lot of opportunity. And I see a lot more Indian people in the workplace in Japan as well. And that was not the case 10 years ago. So those articles, whether it's travel or culture, I think you can really blend them well with different pieces of your website, and kind of blending that in would be a huge thing.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Ananya about real Japan, and I think the point is combining real Japan and adding a global context or global agenda to it. For instance, last week, Ananya and I went to a snack bar, for a shooting, and so snack, right? So you pay 3,000 yen. It's a little hidden bar. There's a mama-san. You drink shochu. You eat like potato chips, and you sing karaoke. So we went there and shot a video and in English, but we argue that snack used to be a place for salarymen. After work, they went there, have secret meetings where you get conversation with the boss. But right now, at the moment, a lot of people in 70s or 80s are going to snack and singing karaoke from daytime, because that is like, so they're alone in their homes. They don't have relatives, so they go there to just make friends or socialize. So snaku is becoming like a third place or safety net for the aging society of Japan. So that's adding the context to a Japanese issue of snaku. It's a Japanese traditional place, but adding a global context that this is how Japan is confronting the aging society. So I think combining two together is, maybe it's the definition of innovation, but I think that's the point what we should be thinking about. Yeah.
I think you've just illustrated the difficulty of communicating Japan to the world. We're talking about snacks.
Yes.
We've relied a lot on Japanese words.
Yes, snack it's not snacks, right? Did you know snacks?
I think a lot of other people.
Yeah, okay.
It's definitely a tough concept to explain, and that is definitely a challenge, I agree.
Yeah, well, we actually have several articles trying to explain snacks.
Yeah, I saw the article on Nippon.com.
And working on those, it was, how do you explain this to people reading it
Yes.
who have no idea what a snack is?
Right.
When it's a type of pub for businessmen.
Yes.
So they can go and relax and be treated like they're very important, and go back to their house where they're probably not treated as they're very important. But bringing that idea across to readers in English was an incredible challenge, because that concept doesn't really exist,
Right.
does it? And I'm just never noticed it.
I think you're right, and each country, I'm sure, as you were saying about the languages and the locations, and I have no idea, but I'm sure China, Taiwan, Korea, India, et cetera, you could find something like that, but you really need to translate it, 100 different ways, I guess, to make that comparison. I mean, fortunately, as I said, at the Journal, we do think about, Wall Street Journal, we do think about our audience, and at times we've tried to make every story more global, and we would even say, like, U.S. President Donald Trump. And but that's not the way American readers call. We don't say U.S. President Donald Trump. We say Trump, President Trump. That's it. So we actually switched back and we said, okay, forget about the rest of the world. We're just going to call it President Trump, President Biden, because that's who our audience is. But you guys have, I think, a bigger challenge, because if you're translating the concept of snack, you have to make it in a way that is not specific to any single culture or any other concept that you're translating. So I respect your challenge.
I want to continue the snack conversation, if you don't mind. I want to go back to the point about Ōiwa-san made about gender inequality, because the gender gap index, Japan sucks, real sucks. So whenever we have a panel like this, there's oji-san, 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 oji-san. So when we were talking about snack, I want to be careful, because it's a community of very homogeneous society. It's only salary man go to snacks, and there's a mama-san. So it was a challenge for me to not put that into a gender context, but a different context, so it can be explained that it's not something, it was a very difficult challenge for me.
Well, that's very very interesting. I think going back to Ōiwa-san's point about gender, I notice a lot of times that when you're discussing gender in Japan, or other topics that are where Japan doesn't have a very good reputation, it's you don't want to misrepresent Japan, because of course Japan has issues with gender and things like that, but the history is different, the culture is different, and it's not a one-to-one to say the issue in the United States or in England or in China or wherever else. So it's presenting it in a truthful and a faithful way, saying that, well, hey, Japan has made progress in this area. Compared to other countries, it's miserable, but it's still progress, right? I think that's one of our challenges. Ōiwa-san, maybe if you can talk a little more about how to give not truthful, like a fair view of the issue that we're dealing with.
非常に難しい宿題を今与えられた気がしますけれども、そうですね、もちろんそのフェイクニュースっていうかね、嘘になってはいけないところもありますし、とはいえその違う価値観で形成されている部分のその社会のシステムとかをどういうふうに説明するか、それは本当に注意深くやっていくしかないのかなっていうふうには思うんですけれども、ただジェンダーのことに関して言えば、私はやっぱり大前提としてそのジェンダーギャップがやはり日本では相当低いし、それはもう絶対に改善していくべきことだとは思うんですけれども、例えばその中でじゃあこの大きな問題に対してどのようにストラグルっていうか、いろんな困難に立ち向かって改善していったか、そういう点がやっぱり重要なのではないかなっていうふうに思っていて、事実は事実として述べるし、その歴史的経緯もちゃんと丁寧に説明はするけれども、じゃあそれに対してどういうふうに前向きに向き合っていけばいいのかとか、他の国とか文化に関してもこういうような学べる、共有できるところがあるとか、そういうところが重要なのかなというふうには思います。私の中でもまだ明確な答えが出ているわけではないですけれども、現時点ではそういうふうに思います。
Would anybody else like to weigh in on this topic?
I want to make sure that we shouldn't use culture or tradition as an excuse for not achieving gender equality. So I think we need facts that Japan is not an equal society in terms of gender or other LGBTQ issues. But at the same time, we should be open to how we're struggling and how we're trying to confront that issue. So I kind of agree to Ōiwa-san's point.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important because gender is a global issue, but it's also an issue for each country that is dealing with it. So Japan has to deal with it in its own way, and presenting that, well, this is where progress is being made, this is where it isn't being made. And of course, there is that shock value if you're someone from overseas, has a very gender equal society, and you see what's happening in Japan, you're going to be shocked, especially considering Japan's situation in the world. Part of the G7, one of the leading economies of the world, you would expect it to be just like all the other, G7 countries, which in some respects it isn't. Yeah. Sorry, I'm doing more talking than I'm supposed to. Peter Durfee, do you have anything to add to this?
Not on gender equality, but going back to the snaku. One actually advantage I think we have is if we decide to do an article about something like snaku, as was discussed here, it's not a concept that is easily presented in one word in any of the languages that we deal with. But the readers who come to our website and look at what we have to offer are all interested in Japan and they want to learn more about Japan. And we can feel quite comfortable throwing these Japanese names at them. Give a paragraph explaining it tends to be this kind of a dim bar with comfortable sofas to sit on, and there's a mama-san, and she feeds you, 10 peanuts that cost 800 yen. There's a lot of detail we can give them, but then we can just call it a snaku, spelled like that. And we've given them a new word, a new thing to be interested in about Japan. That's one tool that we have in our tool chest at our website, because we have this built-in confidence in the interest in Japan among everyone who comes to see the website. It's interesting to see the words that people come and latch onto from overseas when they come to Japan. Historically, of course, food, everyone loves sushi, sashimi, tempura, all of these words you can find in your English dictionary. Kimono or beautiful kimonos in the English dictionary. They come and they grab these words and take them home and use them. In the post-war era, we had the kanban hoshiki, the kanban production methods in factories in Japan. And these were things that foreign manufacturers came and were interested. How is Japan doing it? Why is their quality level so high? Oh, they use this technique, it's called kanban. Let's take that word back home with us. And they use the word kanban in these English contexts when they're talking about manufacturing. It's interesting also to see when Japan tries to push certain words out, it's often quite less successful. You have in 2011, when we were trying to get the Tokyo Olympics, you had the omotenashi, trying very hard to push that word out there, and nobody grabbed it. Monozukuri, the number of reports I translated for the government about Japan's prowess in monozukuri, nobody cares. Readers who are interested in Japan will come and they'll grab what they want, and our job is to figure out what it is that they want and provide that to them. Pushing it out one way, again, one-way communication doesn't work. It's not a conversation in that sense. So it's not propaganda, it's sharing things that we know or we hope they want to come and get from us.
All right, well, grabbing topics of interest and talking about Peter's yuzu. Are there areas of topics in Japan that you think are underserved, that maybe aren't getting the attention that they deserve, that maybe the global audience is just waiting for this? Are there any areas where you think, or any topics that you are particularly interested in, other than snacks, or do we want to stay on snacks? We'll start with Peter, since you started the yuzu.
I think I'm just speaking on the fly here, but healthcare during the pandemic, we tried to do some stories about Japan's response to the pandemic and the mask wearing. Some of them were reasonably well read. I think it was a strange time, and people kind of wanted lessons from overseas, but then masks became political in the U.S. It was hard sometimes to find the right story from Japan that would deliver a digestible lesson to our mostly U.S. readers. But I think there is further ground to be plowed in the area of healthcare, the health systems, both the health policy, which I used to cover in Washington when I was an editor in our Washington bureau, health policy and universal healthcare, insurance systems is one area, and then also just the daily habits of Japanese people, as questions about weight and longevity. And Japan is, as we know, the probably longest lived, I think, at least among the G7 maybe competes with Iceland and Hong Kong for the world's crown as the longest lived nation. And we also look at healthy longevity, or the year how the average age a person lives to while they're still healthy. And Japan, I think, scores well on that measure as well. And why is that? That's an everlasting question that we don't. Sometimes because it's always there, we don't report it enough. But I think there is probably more to be said.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I remember during the pandemic trying to explain to relatives and friends in the United States that people just wore masks, and it was like I stopped even bringing it up because it was impossible to get across that people just wear the masks. Of course, there was a lot of data showing, hey, it worked as well, which was we featured that on the site. Brian, any topics hiding in the rough?
Other than snacks? Okay. So I want to go back to Peter's point that how Japan's reacting to similar situation different from the world. I think AI, artificial intelligence, is a good topic because when I read like Western media, there's reports that say that AI is kind of take away our jobs. It's like a Terminator. But I talked to a PhD student in MIT. He's a Japanese, but he did an interesting research that in Japan, actually AI will create jobs. And it's because, number one, we have Doraemon, so we're not afraid of AI. And since the 1970s, a lot of factories have implemented robots. So I think a lot of factories in Japan are used to working with machines. And there's a interesting research about taxi drivers. And a technology company provided an app for a low-skilled taxi driver. And they found out that whenever they use the app, the low-skilled taxi driver were able to navigate the customers very smoothly. And he caught up with the high-skilled taxi drivers. So it's not taking away the jobs, but it's actually lifting or trying to break the divide between high-skilled and low-skilled workers. And he's arguing that will apply to Japan. So maybe that's a unique point how Japan is kind of perceiving AI. So it's not just AI taking our jobs, but actually AI creating jobs, or maybe not widening the gap, but maybe closing the gap between those skilled workers and high-skilled workers.
So you're saying that Japan is not afraid of AI?
No, because we have Doraemon, Tetsuan Atom, and a lot of animes. Yes.
All right. Ananya, what is? Do you have any hidden gems?
I think there's plenty in general day-to-day life, but one thing that popped out to me is especially Japan right now, like within the business space and how you see that Japan is a really unique market. I always felt like the way that companies, let's say for example in America, so sad that we lost them, Toys R Us and other businesses such as like Mr. Donuts. These you just don't see them in the United States, even though that's where they began. But in Japan, they're doing really, really well. And I kind of dove into that through some Instagram videos as well. And people were like, oh my gosh, like I remember this. And, kind of going from that point, I think it's cool to kind of go into that as well and see how unique of a market Japan is. Because I meet more and more people these days who are helping with Japan expansion, and a lot of foreign companies that have specific businesses that are really good for APAC and specifically Japan. It's a huge chance for them. But I think that, I'm not too, I don't have a lot of information in this area, but I think there are a lot of blockers, especially maybe language or just in general, if they were to expand into Japan. And so providing that information, I think, could be really beneficial.
And we eat Kentucky Fried Chicken at Christmas.
There you go. Yeah. That's another example.
That's interesting. What do you think your take? What's your take on why I think there's only one Mr. Donuts in the United States now? Even what is it? Lawson's was actually started in the United States, and now
really?
they're all gone. Yes. Yeah, it's a fascinating story.
So
7-Eleven, I think, was originally in the U.S., but they just do it better here.
I don't think I have an exact reason for why they do better here, but I think it's interesting to analyze, and especially with short form content. Sorry, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but I think that especially when you're trying to explain a lot of these unique information about why Japan is a unique market, in a 30-second to 1-minute video, you have to boil it down in a way that's really easy to understand, which I think goes against what, ideally you guys would want to do and go more deep into the behind the scenes. But I think what kind of is like created from that is this new form of language, which is almost like localizing to the specific listener, where you're using their slang or kind of explaining something from their perspective. And they get a new insight from that, and I think that's why telling news stories or ideas through video content really works, because you can actually say a lot because you're localizing it to that specific person. And I think that was my biggest takeaway from creating content in that sense online.
Thank you. Ōiwa-san, you mentioned Ikigai earlier, but as working for a Japanese publisher, I'm interested to hear what are some of these topics waiting to take off in the world, or at least the ones that you think are this is something that it would be interesting to share with them.
誰か私に教えてほしいぐらいなんですけどまさに日本の言論人を、これから世界に送り込んでいくっていうことが重要だなっていうふうには思っていまして、でじゃあそれをどういう分野でやっていくのかっていうことだと思うんですけれども、一つ少し考えているのは鈴木大拙の「Zen and Japanese Culture」っていうすごく有名な本があるんですけれども、それの現代版というかですね、そういうようなものができたらいいのかなというふうにちょっとぼんやり考えているのと、あとはそのアートの分野、現代アートの分野とかで世界的に注目されている人とか結構いるので、そういう方をフューチャーしていこうかなっていうこともちょっと考えていたりとか、これ以上ちょっと企業秘密になるので言えないんですけどあと実は世界から注目されてるみたいなところで言うと、結構日本の教育っていうのもあるのかなというふうには少し思っていまして、日本の国内のメディアとかだけ見ていると、日本の教育ってもう結構やばいよねみたいな論調が多いとは思うんですが、ただやっぱりグローバルに見てみると、日本の公教育ってすごくそんなアメリカの私立大学とかみたいにすごく高い授業料とか払わなくても、小学校から大学までかなり高レベルの教育を施していて、さらに掃除の時間とか体育の時間とか、そういうところでの集団規律の身につけ方とか、公的な公共権の考え方を育成するみたいなところで、注目されている、例えば東南アジアの国とかでそれを取り入れて教育をしていこうっていうムーブメントもあるっていうことを以前伺ったので、そういったところとかも実は意外と日本人自身はあまり気づいていないことっていろいろあるのかなというふうに思ったりもします。
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Finding a big hit, just sitting down and thinking, all right, what is a big hit? You never get there. It's interesting that you mentioned education because we did an article several years ago about Japanese elementary schools, so the kids do the cleaning and things like that. And for my culture, that is a completely foreign idea, that there's a janitor who does that. The kids make the mess, the janitor cleans it up. But on our Arabic site, that topic just took off. And I think it was actually talking about that, having school children clean their schools. And I think it was based in Egypt or I think it was Egypt. So that topic was huge interest. Like we need to teach our kids to look after themselves. And I thought that was interesting that the topic in English was, people were kind of like, meh. But in other languages, people were like, yes, this is something we can implement in our culture. I thought that was fascinating. And I guess to go back to Ananya's point about short form content, this is next question I'd like to ask is, well, we have things to say, we've got topics. How do you communicate these to the world? Especially back in the day when we published magazines and you just printed those and handed those out. That's not the world we live in anymore. There's internet, there's social media, there's YouTube, there's whatever. And it changes constantly, as we see with X, that the X of yesterday isn't the X of tomorrow. What is your take on that? We'll start with you. Yes.
I would say that, yeah, I mean, I think times have changed to the point that at least people in my generation, we tend to consume news through social media. And I know that there's definitely a lot of difficult areas in terms of that, like how accurate is that information. But I think that it's how easily accessible it is to us and how individually tailored it is to us as well. And so for me, you know, when I wake up in the morning, I read Morning Brew. It's like immediately delivered to my email, and it's really localized to the Gen Z slang, so it's fun to read and it's really bite-sized. And I think that bite-sized content is a huge element of it. When you look at, for example, Humans of New York or Sabukaru, it's like another media in Japan, you see a lot of different media platforms kind of using Instagram and other social media to promote their content. And it doesn't come off in a way that's almost like a PR ad-based sort of thing. And I think it's really fun to see because we don't think of it in that way either. We genuinely just want to get that content in our hands as easily and quickly as possible. And when you're able to do that, and I do that through my content as well, it's a lot of testing of all sorts of topics, whether it's career or tourism or culture. And you really see people perking up to different things because obviously there's different cultural underlying things behind that as well. And so I think especially for Nippon.com, you can totally do that in terms of putting out that content and keeping in mind though who's really reading it, what are they looking for, and keeping that as your bottom line when creating this content. I think that's extremely crucial.
As far as creating content, I mean, if you're creating content to be shared on the internet compared to being shared on Instagram, compared to be shared on YouTube, that's you might be covering the same topic in 3, 4, 5 different ways, which is incredibly time-consuming and difficult. And I know, Ryan, this is something that your company does. You have several platforms that you work on. How do you?
Yes, so I think to add Anand's point, engaging with influencers, because I think the reach depends on not major news brands, but who's sharing that story, who's talking about the story. So this is not working at this time, but maybe 1 year ago before Elon Musk, maybe following the hashtag or mentioning someone on Twitter or X. So I think that's an important part. For instance, when Shohei Ohtani signed a deal with the Dodgers, some people, US journalists and following Major League Baseball was talking about why is Japan so good at producing good baseball players. And he was talking about Koshien, so maybe we can tag him and talk about Koshien. Why do high school baseball players shave their head? We can argue that no, that's changing. Keio High School, they have free hairstyles, they have diverse hairstyles. So I think engaging with influencers is one point other than technology. Do you agree?
Oh.
Yeah, because you are an influencer.
I got started on Twitter actually, and I was tweeting to mainly Japanese businessmen in their 30s, and that was a huge strategy because you're basically talking to their audience as well at the same time, and it's a huge foot in the door to getting your content viewed by more people beyond your space. And if it clicks with them, then they're sold. You have buy-in from them, and I think it's a huge strategy that I use to this day on most platforms.
Peter Durfee, I know that you are a heavy user of Twitter.
Are we still allowed to call it Twitter? No, it's one of our missions is to get the word out about Japan, to increase the number of Japan fans, but also to increase the number of visitors to our website. However, we do focus on branding to some extent. We want reliable, entertaining, informative stuff out there about Japan with the Nippon.com name attached to it. And this can be done on our website itself, and it's something that we can also do on a Twitter account with Nippon.com, on Facebook with Nippon.com, on YouTube, on Instagram. We don't have unlimited resources, and we're not very young, which is it hobbles us what we can do in these younger spaces. I know we should probably have a TikTok channel by this point, but I don't think anyone in this company uses it. So we need help in this area. We need younger people to come on board and show us how to use these things. But getting the word out about Japan under the name Nippon.com is something that we do want to do in a variety of channels, and maybe aiming at different audiences per channel.
I guess with that being said, do you have to choose your channels? You can't be on everything as effectively. I mean, do you have to sort of choose your battles, so to speak? You can't be on every platform and unless you've got a huge staff that you can pay for that. I guess the Wall Street Journal doesn't really have to worry about branding at this stage, but as far as getting information out on different platforms, is there an approach that you personally have, or?
Yeah, we have limited resources to some extent, and we do have some presence on all of the channels that have been discussed, including TikTok, but not much on TikTok. I think we probably also are a staff of people who mostly do not use TikTok, so it's hard to get that level of buy-in. We are, I think, like Peter D said about Nippon.com, we are worried about making sure people know it's Wall Street Journal content, not just some random story that happens to appear on the internet someplace that they don't identify with your brand name, Nippon.com or Wall Street Journal. And so in that sense, we focused on the app, on our smartphone app as one of the key channels, because if you could get somebody to put the app on their phone and look at it, then we would make the case that you're getting the trusted content from the Wall Street Journal on the app, and it has all the news you need. You check it every day. So I guess that would be our preferred platform. It may not be, but we do need to meet customers where they are, readers where they are.
I agree totally. We have a different. Well, each language has its own approach because each language uses social media in different ways, and the things that we can share maybe in English and Russian and Spanish would be different than compared to Chinese or Arabic, which is always fascinating to see the response that we get from the different languages on certain topics that, maybe the Arabic side will just blow up about something that is just gets very minimal response in English. It's fascinating. So I guess Ōiwa-san, on this topic then, what sort of social media, I mean, because in Japan, Twitter is used different than it is in the United States and in other countries. I mean, so getting your message out on different platforms, what is sort of your approach in the work that you do?
それは本の例えば PR とかでっていうことですよね。なるほど。そうですね。もちろんその出版の世界でも SNS の活用というのはすごく大きな問題になっていて、PHP 新書という私が同時並行で手掛けているシリーズでもX のアカウントも持ってますし、インスタグラムとかでも発信はしてるんですが、竹下さんと納屋さんがおっしゃったみたいにインフルエンサーを巻き込んでいくっていうのがやっぱり SNS においてはすごく重要なのかなっていうふうに思っていて、それこそ日本人で例えばフィリピンで何百万人もインフルエンサーがいる YouTuber の人とか、そういう人も今いらっしゃったりするんですね。であとは結構意外とインドの大使のツイッターがインドで大人気だったりとか、日本人の大使ですよね。ボリウッドのダンスをインド人の YouTuber の人と一緒に踊って、それがすごいバズって大人気になったとか、意外と日本人で海外の読者を持っているインフルエンサーの方って実はすごくいらっしゃるっていうのを、私も最近知ったんですけれども、海外のへの伝えていくっていう時にそういう人を巻き込んで一緒にやっていくとかっていうのはすごく可能性があるんじゃないかなというふうに思ったりしています。
Very interesting. This question, we have actually one question from the internet that people would like to, or someone would like to ask. It has to do with translating ideas that originated in Japanese, translating them into the different languages. So what are some hiccups and difficulties or approaches to sharing an idea written in Japanese in a different language? Maybe Peter D, this is your career to a large extent.
I have this long-running battle with news organizations that publish articles that say, here are 10 untranslatable words. And then they translate every single one of them in the article. Translating something means giving that information to your reader in the reader's own language. It doesn't mean a one-to-one equivalence in number of vocabulary words. It doesn't mean it sounds the same. It doesn't mean the words come out in the same order. It means getting that information into that person's head. The problems that we face in terms of translating, a lot of them have gone away with the advent of the internet. When we had limitations on how much space was on the page, we had to choose very carefully what to throw away, how many words to get rid of to make sure that last line comes right down to the bottom. Nowadays, we can just make it go farther on down that long, unending page. So we have room to give these explanations of difficult to understand concepts or alien concepts to foreign readers. We can spend a paragraph describing what is a snuck. We can spend 2 paragraphs telling people what's going on in Japanese healthcare. It's freedom to share this information accurately, informatively, and I don't know. It's not something that we have to worry about so much nowadays. We don't have a client looking over our shoulder saying, use this word, use this phrase, don't use that one. We can craft the output as we need it to be, as we want it to show up for our readers. And we do it separately for each language. And I don't think translation is, of course, always going to be a difficult problem, but the difficult part of it comes in truly understanding what this person wrote in the first place in your source language, and understanding who is the reader, and making sure the output is a good match for that reader, their needs and their abilities. And there was also a brief mention of AI being something that will create new jobs. There are a lot of people who say AI is going to take away translation jobs. I don't think an AI can do this, thinking about what the reader needs, thinking about what that author actually had in mind as he put these words together. And these are things that we try to do as we translate, and that's the challenge of translation lies there. It's not in the words that we have to worry about.
Peter, I know that the Wall Street Journal works both ways. You also translate articles into Japanese, and I'm assuming you do from Japanese to English. How do you approach that?
Actually, in our case, it's just all of our content is written in English, and then we do have a Japanese language website, jp.wsj.com, that translates selected, not all our articles, but those that we believe will be of interest to the Japanese audience, including some of our coverage of Japan. Sometimes people here want to see what the perspective is, but they can't or have difficulty reading the English. So we call it and we face some of these same challenges. And I work with our translators sometimes, stories that I've written. I think I agree that the incredible development of AI translation does not eliminate the need for human translators at all. What it does do, and I've discussed this with the managing editor of our Japanese language site, George Nishiyama, it changes, I think, the skill of the translator a little bit, because maybe the AI can do a first draft of the story, or translate some sections that are kind of commonly used words that don't require a lot of explanation. And then maybe what the translator is doing is working on that one part where you have to define snaku, and crafting that, perhaps a whole paragraph to explain what the word means. That's really creation on the part of the translator. That really would be the work of the translator, or sort of, what's the word, interpreter. I use the word, interpreter of the original article into the other language. As opposed to, if it's a simple wire story about stocks went up today, maybe a machine can do that. You just give a quick read and fine, send it out. It takes 5 seconds. And then other stories may require a lot of interaction and involvement, because the reader ultimately is a human. So that's our main goal, is to make that connection.
Well, as somebody who has been studying Japanese for a while, and you use Japanese on your social media accounts, so what is your view on that?
Yeah, actually, I was going to say a lot of the points that you guys brought up are things that I do in my day job, pretty often. For example, translating concepts of basic investing from English and then, putting that into ChatGPT, getting a Japanese first draft, and then going in there and kind of making it more interactive and fun to watch is kind of what we do for a lot of the content that we put out. That's one side of things, but where I do it with my personal content creation as well is it's really important to craft a narrative. And, for example, I've done like a different snack shoot as well. And in that situation, experiencing that in Japanese, in a very Japanese context, and kind of translating that experience in a way that would really make sense to the viewer and also be fun and interactive. And really doing that, I think, both ways is a difficult challenge and something that I think only humans can do. But it's a huge thing of my daily job as well. Yeah.
All right. Ōiwa-san, as a Japanese publisher, how do you see that as getting the ideas from Japanese into a different language?
そうですね。やっぱり翻訳できない言葉っていうのもどうしてもあって、例えば生きがいって本当にそうなんですけれども、そのスペイン人のジャーナリストの方がおっしゃっていたのは、生きがいを一語で表せる英語もスペイン語もないんだっていうことをおっしゃっていたので、なんかそれは本当になんて言うんでしょうね、ユニバーサルワードとして流通していくのかなというふうに思いますし、あとは本当にその翻訳の難しさっていうのは、もう翻訳者さんが多分一番よく分かってらっしゃって、私は編集者なので、もうそれを頑張ってくださいっていつもサポートするしかないんですけれども、ランダースさんがおっしゃったみたいに、やっぱり AI があっても翻訳者の仕事って絶対なくなる。確かにそのタイプがちょっと変わってくる。例えばこの間聞いた話だと、通訳者さんである政治家の方が絶対その通訳者さんじゃなきゃダメだっていう方がいらっしゃるんですけれども、これちょっとどこまで言っていいのかあれなんですけど、結構その政治家の方 NG ワードみたいな、特にジェンダー系の NG ワードみたいなのをポロッと言ってしまう方らしくて、ただ彼女はそれを完璧にこれはダメだなって思ったのはクリアして、なんていうかうまく文脈に合わせて訳してくれるみたいな方がいらっしゃるらしくて、これはちょっとあまりいい例ではないのかもしれないんですけれども、そういった言語のプロっていうのは絶対にこういう時代だからこそすごく必要になると思いますし、特にそういう翻訳者さんを日本語を、翻訳できる海外のネイティブの方も、日本人で英語にできる方も、英語とか多言語に翻訳できる方っていうのはやっぱりもっと育てていかなければいけない。その文化庁とかでも結構今翻訳者さんをいろいろ育成するっていうのも力を入れてやってらっしゃいますけれども、そういったところは政策的にももっとやっていかなければいけないなというふうに思います。
Yes, I agree totally. That in something that we do at Nippon.com is I mean, we have native speakers of each of our languages who are able to present that information in their own language, who have they have a deep understanding of Japanese culture, that they're able to interpret that and translate that. I guess in the few minutes we have left, this is the sort of the part that I was a little worried about, because I'd like to. Ryan, you started off with some heavy words for Nippon.com. Maybe we can end with some, if you have some advice or comments or just complaints is fine as well.
I think it's a wonderful website, and yeah, I always look at Nippon.com. But I think advice, for the website or the. Okay.
Whatever comes to mind, whatever you want to say about Nippon.com.
Yeah, I think maybe creating more videos will be a next step, because like I said in the beginning, a lot of people, the world is created not only by text but by videos. So I think in videos, it's another way to communicate. So and there are a lot of great places to shoot in Japan. So I think this session is also great, but I think people outside of Japan want to see the real live Japan, or actually a Japanese person even speaking English may be a surprise to the international audience. So I think videos will be the great next step.
All right, thank you. Just videos. Peter's writings. Maybe Ananya, do you have words of wisdom?
Yeah, just to bounce off what you had mentioned, I think that maybe this is a thing that I thought of for Wall Street Journal as well, but a lot of, if you were to go into content creation, for example, you don't have to, but I think that a huge plus that you guys have just as Wall Street Journal is that you're a credible source, and that's a huge power that you have over, all the other sources out there. And, communicating that and making it clear is a reason why people are willing to listen. And so taking clips of just content that you put out on your website onto social media can make a big difference. That alongside, I think overall visuals and how the website looks is something that also communicates credibility and interest and excitement. And if you guys are at the cutting edge of Japan and know everything that's currently happening and are good at communicating it, I don't think that the website fully shows that. And I think visually it can look a lot more at that level. And that was my criticism, I guess.
Well taken. All right. Ōiwa-san, Peter's been writing notes, so I'm going to save you for last because I think you've got probably a lot to say. Ōiwa-san.
はい。やっぱり7言語での発信しているサイトって本当に日本で他にないと思いますし、そういう意味で世界中に情報を届けるっていうすごく大きなパワーと可能性を持っているサイトだというふうに私は思っています。で、日本 .com 様へのなんていうか厳しいコメントってわけじゃないんですけども、日本の発信力を高めるためにすごく日本 .com さんにしかできないことがあるんじゃないかなっていうふうに思っていまして、それはやっぱりそのグローバルな語り手、言論人を日本 .com さんからスターを作っていくっていうことができたら、合わせてその日本 .com さんもすごく世界中に知られることになりますし、日本の発信力の強化っていうことにもつながるんじゃないかなっていうふうに思います。で、メディアのすごく大事な役割というか、読者に伝えるっていうこともそうなんですけれども、メディアは言論人とか書き手とかを育てるっていうやっぱり役割って社会的にすごく大きなものがあって、で、うちの会社が発行しているボイスという論壇誌があるんですけれども、そこでもその海外の指揮者と日本人の指揮者の対談の場を設けたりしているんですが、そうすると普通にレストランとかで雑談しているのとは違って、モデレーターがいて一つのテーマについて深く語り合うっていうことができると、向こうの海外のキーオピニオンリーダーにも日本の意見が伝わりますし、海外のその意見を受けて日本のこのナラティブっていうのもより醸成されていくっていう相互作用があると思うので、ぜひその日本 .com という大きなパワフルな可能性を持った媒体にそういう大きな未来の役割を担っていただけたら、日本の対外発信もより強化されるのではないかなというふうに思います。
Thank you very much. Peter, you've been writing frantically.
Yeah, we're taking notes on what others are the valuable insights that we've heard so many valuable, including for our business. So I've maybe you intended to get some, advice for Nippon.com, but I also hear some advice for the Wall Street Journal as well today. So I thank my fellow panelists. I kind of agree with Ananya that if I was to make one request of the website, it would be for sort of, I guess, advice is how often is the reader supposed to come back? I mean, we would say at the Wall Street, we update, of course, we update it constantly. Certainly, if you come to our site 24 hours from now, you'll see completely different, not completely, but mostly different set of stories. And we hope we may not achieve that for many of our readers. And in fact, one of our problems is that sometimes readers don't come back as often as we would like. But anyway, we do have the target or the goal of readers coming back every day. And why do they come back every day? We hope because there's something new. It's what's happening today in the world, and also hopefully our unique perspective on the news. And I can't quite tell on Nippon.com whether I'm supposed to come back every day for what's happening that day, or I can only come once a week and I'll catch the the highlights of that week, or just really never. But when I search for something on Google, quite often Nippon.com, like I search for sushi or whatever tempura, perhaps one of your excellent articles on that subject comes up. Maybe that's okay. Like, what is the frequency? Maybe you can. Yeah. The other I have a small suggestion is, I don't think Russians are listening to us anymore, frankly, and so I would suggest killing Russian and replacing it with either Hindi or Korean.
I think our Russian translator might disagree with you, but yeah. But on top of that, yeah. All right, well, it kind of brings us to the end, but I thought we might end on sort of a light note. Thank you for all your wonderful insight and comments. To go back to what Ōiwa-san said about leaders in Japan, who is one person, very shortly, who is one person that you would like to introduce to a global audience? Maybe a leader in Japan. Who is somebody that you think is worth having more of a global audience? Is there anybody, if you have anybody in mind, we'll start with anyone. Is there a name? That's a tough one. They don't necessarily need to be alive and doing things right now. They might be somebody in the past. But they need to be alive. All right, alive in your heart. Have I stumped the panel? I have stumped the panel. So now that's the problem. There's got to be somebody. There's got to be somebody out there that you want to share with the room. SaすがŌiwaさん。
すいません、ちょっと私が言うとなんていうかちょっと自分の企画みたいな感じになっちゃうのであれなんですけども、ぜひ本当に皆さんにもこの人をもっと世界に出していってほしいっていう方がいたらぜひ教えていただきたいんですが、今私が個人的に思っているのは落合陽一さんとか、私の担当著者なんですけれども、彼メディアアーティストなんですが、最近茶の文化っていうのをデジタルのメディアアートで表現したらどういうふうにしたらいいのかっていうことにトライされていて、日本文化を現代の文脈に置き換えた作品っていうのをすごく出していらっしゃるので、そういうデジタルと社会、さらに日本の伝統文化みたいなところの融合みたいなところをぜひ英語とかで語っていただきたいなっていうふうに思っています。
Thank you. What is their name one more time?
落合陽一さんです。
落合陽一。If you could.
テレビとかにも出てらっしゃる筑波大学の准教授で、はい。
So look them up. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of our panel discussion today. I'd like to thank all of our wonderful panelists for your insight. Can we give them a round of applause? Wonderful audience for listening so attentively here in our studio and our it's called our open space, our salon here, and also those of you who joined us online. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our live stream. Thank you very much, and see you at Nippon.com.
Nippon.com